Good evening, viewers. Welcome to the Speakers Gallery. Our guest today is Professor Peter Kagwanja. Professor Peter Kagwanja is an academic, a scholar in his own right. He is a political strategist, he's a political economist, and has also been involved in security issues. Professor Kagwanja, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Professor Kagwanja, let us begin by telling Kenyans or giving Kenyans a brief rundown of your history. Take as much as about 3 or 4 minutes.
I'm what you'd call a normal Kenyan because I went to normal schools, normal spaces. I started off at CCM, Kinjirini Primary School, which is Catholic Mission School, way back in Murang'a. Went to Kangaru High School, went to University of Nairobi then, and as we were going through the study, it became Kenyatta University, so we were part of the transformation. Then I taught at Moi University for almost 10 years, and I moved on to the United States as a Fulbright scholar at the University of Illinois. And from there, I went for postdoc activities, fellowships, and so on in Netherlands, University of Leiden, Oxford, St. Anthony's College, and other places. Then we settled in South Africa for another lengthy period where I worked with reputable international organizations. I was the regional director for the International Crisis Group, those who know that particular think tank based in Brussels. I then joined the Human Sciences Research Council, one of the oldest think tanks in Africa, founded in 1948, with a very bad reputation of having midwifed apartheid. All the thinkers of apartheid were working within that institution, but after the end of apartheid, the new African leaders used it now to midwife the new African dispensation. So we did a lot of work in founding the African Union, the initial thinking behind the African Union. And I also taught at various universities there. I taught at the University of Pretoria as a research fellow. I also taught at the University of Rhodes as an adjunct professor, what we call visiting professor. And for 5 good years, I worked as advisor to the government of President Kibaki on strategy. I specifically worked on the Constitution as one of the strategists. I worked very closely with the Prime Minister today, including giving him morning briefs regarding what strategy we were following to ensure that the election, the Constitution won. I worked with many other people at that time, which was great. And I also managed the transition from Kibaki to the current government. Managing simply means providing intellectual thinking behind that, with the idea that we wanted a peaceful, stable transition that would get us to the new Kenya, that we are younger Kenya, that we are now in terms of leadership. I'm currently heading the Africa Policy Institute, a regional think tank, and I am also teaching at the University of Nairobi, Institute of Diplomacy and International Studies. And I'm very pleased to be in this Kenyan equivalent of hard talk. I hope it's not going to be too hard for me.
Thank you. Thank you. You were part of the team that worked very hard in the referendum for the Constitution 2010, which won with a landslide majority. Yes. I want to believe also you were part of that, the orange and the banana. When we had the previous one, which was defeated, which was called the Cliffy draft, or the Wako draft.
The Wako draft.
Yes, yes. Can you tell us how you were able to transit from one set of a powerful political conviction to another one that essentially, by and large, looked very different from the first one?
I think the first one, we had just emerged from the one-party era, yes, with the victory of 2002 victory. And what we find at that juncture was that this was not your policy-oriented kind of politics. This was really intrigues of power. And everything was taken within that context of intrigues of power. It's literally us versus them. but not in ethnic terms, because this were really coalitions of ethnic groups. People try to kind of see ideology in the conflict or that tension between and within elite groups.
The orange and the banana.
Even before the orange, it all started in 2004.
Within the same.
That was
same
NAC.
government.
That was NAC.
Yes.
The LDP group side, and we have the
NAK.
group,
Yes.
NAC group, and then LDP. Some people defected. We have Saitoti moving on to this other side. Mudeawori moving to this side, who were originally LDP. So it was a kind of a new dispensation, and for those of us who are younger people. At the policy level rather than in the practical policy level, political level, taking sides was not really us. But you had to advise your principals on how to go about it. And I think it was a very painful defeat, for the banana at that by orange. And I think that victory set the tone for the 2007-2008 violence. And so it was a negative build-up, and the country seemed to be hurtling down to a direction we did not very much know. But there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of bitterness, and so on. And I remember I came, because at that time I was working from South Africa, so I was advising the government from South Africa. I was working in very ordinary areas, because I was a consultant for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to draft the new constitution from 2005. And when we were drafting the constitution, not the constitution, but the Kenya's foreign policy, the first foreign policy document, and I think one of my colleagues, Cheruget, Ambassador Cheruget, has just published a book based on that whole period. And the interesting bit about that is coming to Kenya, you could, the kind of tension that was in the country was palpable between 2005 and 2007. You'd almost cut it with a knife. And therefore, we come to 2007 to 2010, and we have learned the hard lessons. I've just shared with you the book I published around that time, 2009 to 2010.
Yeah.
And when I was publishing, doing work or collecting colleagues to give me chapters for that book, I could tell that Kenyans have now changed their minds, including myself, that now what we want is a peaceful country, and we have seen the depth to which we can sink as a country, and we don't want to go that way. So there were a lot of compromises that were done. And we first went into a power sharing arrangement. People heckled at each other, wrote nasty things about each other. I remember my teacher and myself, Professor Anyang' Nyong'o, now the governor of Kisumu, and I trading some things. Then we come together and say, what are we doing? Ultimately, we found ourselves in the same secretariat.
The country came together.
The country came together, and that was symbolized by the secretariat that were formed by the president and the prime minister at that time, where I was a co-director, and there was a director from ODM side. And then we had the conveners, Kiraitu Murungi and Anyang' Nyong'o on top of us. Then there was Kibaki and Raila on top. That was really a perfect kind of marching of the nation in a way that we are fighting on the same side. And that's what was easy for us. I commissioned a research around June 2010 to see how popular the Constitution was. And we found that at that juncture, only 52% of Kenyans endorsed the Constitution. And when we sat back to review, together with the cabinet group that was doing the job, we said this is very, very dangerous for the country. If we don't get an absolute majority endorsement of this constitution.
The margin was too small.
The margin is too small and can be questioned by anybody. And that will throw us back to a kind of stability. That gave birth to what we call the new Kibaki. Mm-hmm. Because President Kibaki had literally to get out of the office. He had to speak to the media. He had to speak to Kenyans themselves and literally sell the constitution. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister got unwell at that juncture. He was within the country. He was working from where he was very, very, very well, giving us advice, us briefing him and giving us the feedback with the Janet Ongera, because we're the people who were working on a day-to-day basis in terms of the constitution.
Kibaki was elected in 2002 with a landslide majority.
Yes.
People came together from across the divide.
Yeah.
Ethnicity, political parties, ideological persuasions, all those things were merged and collapsed into one national cause. When he came to power, although he was not feeling very good and a bit sick, the impression is that he blew up a lifetime opportunity for this country. He had an opportunity to unite the country and unite it hard, which he never did. That's why we ended up with the 2005 unpopular constitution and the breakup within NAC and the formation of the ODM party itself. Another school of thought, of course, which I subscribe to, in a sense, I can tell you, was that in terms of economic delivery, he did better than anybody else who was there before him. He literally used the money well, and he opened up the country and built up the infrastructure that we're proud of. Now, before you come to this one, the good part of Kibaki, let's go back to the chance and opportunity which he blew up.
Kibaki did not blow up any opportunity. Whoever you put in his position would have faced the same scenario. Reason being, revolutions eat themselves up. This is the nature of the revolution, from the French Revolution, the American Revolution. There is something they call in very complicated language the tamido. This is the consequences of the momentum of revolutions. So the NAC revolution was bound to implode because it brought unlike-minded and like-minded, and people had to sort themselves out. At the end of the day, I think the two heroes of that revolution are President Kibaki and Prime Minister Raila Odinga. Why are they the heroes? Because they discovered that if we don't come together and if we don't sharpen on this thing together, it's going to go badly for the country. And that was the basis of power sharing. Power sharing is what helped Kenya's revolution from sliding into anarchy. If you remember the French Revolution ended up with the worst bloodbath in the history of France.
Yes.
And it is only after that that the American Revolution saw the values of the French Revolution and rescued the French Revolution. It's American Revolution, the Americans' ability to transform themselves, which saved that. So Kibaki was essentially a victim of history because he was presiding over the NAC Revolution. And if you look at what we've gone through, what we call now Kenya's quiet revolution, we literally changed everything that we had from a parliamentary system to a presidential system, from created devolution, and all these changes within a period of less than 10 years, which is really phenomenal.
I was part of that negotiations in the disputed elections of 2007, 2008, and the post-election violence itself. And literally rubbed shoulders with the eminent personalities, John Kufuor, the late former Secretary General of the United Nations,
Kofi
Annan, when an understanding was reached. And that understanding was that there was going to be power sharing. The purpose, the object, and the spirit of that particular understanding was that it was going to be a real power sharing. And I'm coming to this one also because I want to show you a dimension in which some people feel that Kenyatta Raila also bungled the same way Kibaki bungled the first time. It was supposed to be a real power sharing. And in that power sharing, the understanding was that Kibaki was going to choose a ministry, Raila was going to choose one. And they would go on one after the other until they exhaust the cabinet positions portfolios that were there. Then they would go back again and do that with the permanent secretaries. That way there was going to be a serious coalition. Now, other than the Prime Minister, let me take you a little bit back. While we were looking for that, and I remember the American president on a real-time television saying that power sharing in Kenya has got to be real power sharing. Whatever Kibaki and Raila discussed between themselves, Raila flew out of this place, had his own handshake with Kibaki in, was Sagana Lodge?
Sagana Lodge.
Sagana Lodge. And Kibaki came back and said, Hatamkia Ninyama. There's a feeling on our section of the country that that was another lost opportunity. Because if we had that government, which essentially was going to reflect the country and reflect the different ideological persuasions, the foundation would have been laid for a stable Kenya ad infinitum. That never happened again. What did you people do to Raila to betray his friends and the cause that he stood for and come back to us and tell us, I
like that idea of you people. Because
I'm talking about the think tank that was in Kibaki's camp.
Yeah, you've already classified me as you people, but that's okay. It's quite in order.
Yes.
First and foremost, the best power sharing arrangement we have had in this country was under Mzee Daniel Arap Moi, the former president. Yes. Because Moi ensured that every district, every region was represented. It came a point, this is on a humorous note, that people would say that we have a professor on the other age. Why don't we have a professor here? Some people got confused that professors are not appointed by, it's not an appointed for position. But it still would come in terms of agitation.
People
in local
left
places.
out to the not have professors,
yes,
wanted their professors
they wanted
to be appointed.
To be appointed, their reges and so on.
Okay.
So President Moi tried to create the face of Kenya under that. And the same case with his predecessor, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta. He also tried to create the face of Kenya. So this notion that the power sharing should have been the parity chosen by two people was itself, a misnomer in the sense that power sharing was not for the heck of it or for the sake of it. It was to create a government of national unity, which was to midwife a new political dispensation and enable Kenya to sign a new social contract. And I think, as far as I am concerned, the Kibaki-Raila arrangement won because it managed to give Kenya a new dispensation, which the new government of President Uhuru Kenyatta would now implement. So if you're judging Uhuru's government, it's in terms of whether it is implementing what Raila and Kibaki agreed on well. That's essentially it. But as far as the power sharing was concerned, those things were expected. First, if you are a prime minister in a presidential system under the old constitution, what was there for you? Now, I sat in one of the meetings, and this is the first time I'm disclosing this, and people on the Kibaki side argued that this constitution is giving Raila Odinga too much power, and therefore we need to reject it. It's giving him too much power. And I remember the answer that was given that time, and it was in terms of question. It asked, what more power does it give him than is given by the National Accord and Reconciliation Act?
Absolutely.
Because Raila's power at that juncture was defined within that Accord and National Reconciliation Act.
Yes.
It did not go deep into the
Reconciliation
Act of 2008.
Yes.
It did not go beyond that to restructure the constitution to reflect the power of a prime minister. That's why in the 2010 constitution, it was so easy to knock off the prime minister out of the equation and remain with a pure presidential system because it was really ephemeral. Now, how did we expect to share power in the kind of parity you're talking about in this kind of ephemeral arrangement of institutions? It's not like the French institution or now currently the Somali constitution or the Ethiopian constitution where you have the president as a figurehead and the prime minister is the person running the show in terms of government. That's not how Kenya was restructured. The president was still in charge of government because we had a semi-presidential system. So the sharing of power in that parity, I would argue.
The National Accord itself By the way, any provision of the Constitution at the time which is in conflict with the national accord was voided to the extent of that inconsistency.
Yeah.
Anything that was inconsistent. So the national accord, although it was an act of parliament, was superior to the Constitution as we had it then. And the national accord itself said 50-50 power sharing, and basically assumed a real power sharing. And you'll come to that again. And we had a similar false start. Because if you remember, there was a cooperation which was there with Moi in 1997,
Yeah.
98, to be more exact, which was essentially a way of trying to get KANU and the opposition coming together. And our good friend Raila Odinga, instead of sitting with all the other opposition guys, just worked with his NDP to create that cooperation. And eventually ended up getting NDP sucked into KANU and Raila becoming the Secretary General of KANU. So we lost.
And the tractor killing the Jogo.
Yes, and the tractor killing the Jogo. Eventually, of course, that's how it ended up. But the whole idea was that there were Kenyans who were fighting for changes and real changes, institutional, constitutional, functional changes. They were not fighting for an understanding between two friends. Or two guys who were forced one time. So the one again with Kibaki ended up in more or less the same way. A handshake between the two of them in Sagana, and Raila came back. And that's when actually the unfolding of ODM began, because I remember very well, the same guys who were there, it was called the Pentagon those days, went to Raila and told him what happened. And if there was an understanding, there was a handshake, not as much a handshake. Where is our share? And progressively, that coalition collapsed. And we are now seeing exactly a similar thing, in which the NASA team were not put into the know, and Raila went and again had a handshake with Uhuru. So when the Kenyan masses, the 42, 45 million Kenyans, going to get a real institutional, functional reformers in the country that will have to translate into every individual Kenyan, regardless of whether you're in government or not. Because right now, the appointments that are coming from Uhuru, people are saying that are just designed to please Raila, and the trip to Luo Nyanza, and all those. So it's becoming, it's more or less in line with the Kenyatta, the Moi one, the one again with Kibaki, and now with Uhuru. You know,
I think that's a serious misreading of what the Prime Minister. I don't want to assume to be talking
You're
for
an
him.
academic also.
Yeah, but I'm looking at this from a
yes.
research. Now, countries everywhere in the world are work in progress. Reforms are kind of utopian thinking. You want to go to heaven. You want to go to Canaan. You want to go, you know, you've got to create that imagination of a better place where people are going. And it's that vision that keeps people. During famine in Kikuyu country, mothers would cook the banana tubers. They don't cook. But kids will sleep waiting for food to cook. When they say, Mommy, is food ready? They say, wait. That is the same thing with politics. You have to cook tubers, so that the country can hold together in hope.
Until it rains.
Until it rains.
Yes.
So in this particular case, I think where the Prime Minister...
It's temporarily buying hope.
Where the former Prime Minister has fared very well is that he sees the turning point, what you call the tipping point in a country. And he pulls back when we reach the tipping point. If you look at the 1997-98 issue, we already, Jesse Jackson was already here, touring the country, preaching peace for us on behalf of Bill Clinton, because we had reached a point where the country could tip. And therefore...
Hold it right there. Viewers, we will have a commercial break and we'll be right back. Welcome back, viewers. This is the Speakers Gallery for the viewers who are joining us now. And our guest today is Professor Peter Kagwanja. Professor Peter Kagwanja, I cut you short. You were just about to finish.
Yes. I
finish.
was saying that countries or nations live on great thoughts about their future. And a good leader is the one who maintains,
gives hope,
keeps that hope, cultivates that, optimism among his people. A good leader is also the one who discovers, who is able to discern when to stop and when to move on, and when his country is in danger. I think the credit for the Prime Minister throughout history is his ability to discern when the country is reaching a tipping point. And at that juncture, he takes a turn that prevents the country from tipping off or tipping over, and instead, we start now to consolidate ourselves. Obviously, that will produce a backlash, and this is where the argument that you did a handshake, we needed to do this. And the same thing has been said in our place. Maybe I can also illustrate that. On the side of the government, particularly its supporters, who may not necessarily be in the government, they thought that, Kibaki sold off. That he had won an election, he had been declared the winner, there was a count, a recount, and a recount, and they all indicated he has won. Why would you want to share power with anybody? There was a lot of disgruntlement with that power sharing thing. And of course, he had to calm his side of the world. And even when it came to sharing power, there are quite a number of people who thought that, just small things, but Kibaki insisted on literally, working together with the Prime Minister. Yes.
Our country has a problem in every election, almost every election. There are few exceptions. Mm-hmm. In a good number of them, we have violence because there is a feeling, there is a realization that the election was stolen. Mm-hmm. So more than anything else, what we need to solve is to resolve the issue of electoral impunity or supposed electoral impunity, assumption, a feeling, a belief of electoral impunity. We have not dealt with those institutional frameworks right now. Every time we come together because there are positions to be shared. Create the position of Prime Minister, share the government 50-50. Doesn't matter how it's going to be shared, take them here, and then go back again. We have a similar one. It's nullified, boycott, again, handshake. The next thing you know, the president is going to Luo Nyanza and basically dishing out goodies out there and appointments of certain Luos to positions of prominence, ambassadors and other things. No, you see, we are entrenching, we are fortifying the very reasons why we're divided. We're divided on the issues of tribalism because of the political contestations. Political contestations are there because we try to create ethnic blocks to win elections. And we're not resolving the issue of the so-called impunity. Now, when are we going to get over this? Because we had this as far back as the formation of KPU, when KPU was proscribed after a while, or rather they were put in detention, and we still have that being carried over. And every time, instead of getting a serious solution to these things, we are treating the symptoms and we're making a few politicians happy.
There is something we call revisionist history. Revisionist history is when we are rewriting history from where you are, rather than writing it from the content, the context in which it unfolded, The circumstances of the 60s and 70s and 80s are very different from our circumstances. That's one. Two, this country has too many lawyers, perhaps too many. And I think it's high time we start now making law a postgraduate degree. No undergraduate should be taught law until you bring us that degree in physics, that degree in history, that degree in political science, that degree in economics. Then you can do your law. So that you get the basic nuts and bolts of thinking.
You're able to see the philosophy,
that underlines what you are calling impunity.
I think we're going in that direction. Many people are right now at the University of Nairobi. If you go and look at it, there's so many engineers and doctors
who are now going to law,
and political scientists, and some of them with master's degrees who are going to go and study law.
Even Strathmore, I've seen that. But I think at the governmental level, that need now to be the law. It is what obtains in whatever. Why am I bringing the lawyer? The debate on impunity is a legal debate. It's not a political debate.
You sure about that?
And we are dealing with political issues. Now, the person who claimed that his election is stolen might actually be doing it for a political strategic reason. Because how do you hold your constituency again and again after you have lost the election and again and again? There must be a grievance. So the idea of election rigged, not only in Kenya but across the world, is normally used as a grievance to hold your constituency together. And you are holding an angry constituency. What Prime Minister Odinga has managed to do over time is to diffuse that sense of grievance in his community by basically embracing the competition and thereby creating a section of it. Of course, the whole constituency will not be happy, but at least the vast bulk of it will now talk about we are building bridges. Now,
Professor Kagwanja,
let me finish on this, because this is really critical.
Yes.
And let me be categorical about this.
Yes.
I was there in KICC in 2008, 2007, that night, and so on. And I can tell you certainly, and I have followed all the statistics that were done that time, President Kibaki won that election fair and square. I was here in 2013, and President Uhuru Kenyatta won that election fair and square. And I was here in 2017. I observed the double election, the most expensive election in the history of democracy, the most protracted 123 days of election.
Is the last one?
Yeah, it's the most protracted election in the history of democracy. Now, President Kenyatta won that one fair and square. Not once, but twice. Now, and the handshake that has come after that has its meaning. And I think we need to embrace that meaning more than anything else.
The handshake is very good.
The handshake,
in that it brought about stability and peace in the country. It's quite understandable.
Yeah.
I don't know how much it has made an effort to resolve the underlying, not the symptoms. You see, the insecurity we had, the demonstrations we had, the capital flight we had in the country was a symptom of other. But let's go to another thing altogether. I think we've had enough time on this one now, and we might never come to basically a conclusive understanding on that. But I respect very much your opinion on that. Come to the economy. You are also a political economist in this country. Sure. We've invited the Chinese. They have put for us what they believe is, what some people believe is a white elephant project. And whatever the Chinese have gone into, they have more or less taken over those countries. Zambia is a case in mind, and a number of Angola is another country, and a number of other countries. Ethiopia is another country where they put up some serious infrastructure, and right now there's a problem in how they're going to service those debts. Now we're 60% of our GDP is now being used to service the debts. Am I right?
Continue. Oh, you want me to answer?
Yeah. How do you understand? Give us your piece on the Chinese loans, the Chinese investments in the country, and how that is going to be good for the country.
I have been working with China. I've been working with America.
Yeah.
And I've been working with Europe. From the perspective of my think tank, Africa Policy Institute. Let me say the following. There is a new scramble for Africa. And the scramble for Africa is very different from the old scramble, where only Europeans sat and held the knife and cut the cake for themselves, and each cut according to its might and strength. This scramble is new because Africans are part of this scramble. And we're insisting that whatever happens must be in our interests. So whatever Chinese are funding in Kenya, whatever the Americans are funding in Kenya, whatever the Europeans are funding in Kenya, it is in our plans. It's in our agenda, either Vision 2010 or the 4 big pillars that President Kenyatta has unveiled. So the idea that the Chinese are taking over itself is a myth. It's a myth because they cannot take over what you want. I mean, the whole idea of SGR started way back in 2000. I'm sure there are those who are in the audience who recall President Kibaki going to New York and Washington and robbing of the Americans to replace the old railway with a new railway. What was the answer given by the World Bank? The Washington consensus does not believe in investing in infrastructure. 70% of their aid to Africa goes to health because they are stronger in pharmaceutical industry, and that's where they are going to make profit. China's model is different. China's model is 70% of the investment abroad is to infrastructure. And therefore, the marriage between China and Africa is mutual. It's what the Chinese are calling win-win. Because Africans want infrastructure to open up their economies. And China can invest in infrastructure. And by the way, it's not only in Africa. It is in all developing countries. Because that was the bottleneck. You have these horse trucks. And vehicles have increased. 70%, 90% of our cargo from Mombasa, or freight, from Mombasa to upcountry, including Eastern Congo, Uganda, and so on, was coming by road. Now, what did that mean? You take 12 hours to move from here to Mombasa.
Yeah.
Now, today, you move to Mombasa in 4 hours. And the buses, the time the buses are now taking is shorter than before. You can go with 7 hours, 8 hours, and you're in Mombasa. So the idea that there is a takeover of Africa by China itself is propaganda. Let me put it
Professor,
starkly.
Understandable. Infrastructure is the primary investments for any country to have a serious takeoff, economic takeoff. Mm-hmm. That's understandable. Through the coalition government and the one Kibaki was there between 2002 and 2007, mm-hmm. we have been able to, or Kibaki's government has been able to initiate the Chinese loans and technical know-how to put up the roads infrastructure that we have in Nairobi, the thicker road, and have literally opened up our capital city and its mm-hmm. a satellite. Thika is basically an industrial satellite city. Mm-hmm. And we only spent 32 billion shillings.
32 billion?
Yes, mm-hmm. That's what I thought. Mm-hmm. I might get. How is an existing railway where you just put in a faster railway and you change the railway gauge itself, open up the country, and you're spending 400 plus billion.
No, it's 332.
332 billion Kenya shillings. Yeah. That would have opened up a dual carriageway to Mombasa, to Mandera, to Malaba, to Lunga Lunga, all the way to Tanzania, literally to South Sudan. It would have done.
You are thinking that my uncle, and he should not hear me, who used to say that we are spending so much money in education, why don't we just buy an acre of land here and settle our sons?
Yes.
You know, and he was legitimate in his own way, because yes. we are growing coffee. If you don't take the kids to school and you use that money to buy an acre, the kids will do farming, will do picking the coffee in that 1 acre, and you'll have money in the compound. That's an argument. So you invest in education, and you don't even know where the kids are going to make it in Form 4 or they're going to go to the university. But our parents had that vision and they invested. Uhuru Kenyatta, I think, is not looking at Kenya. Kenya is the largest and the most robust economy in East and Central Africa. Our future is not in this small economy called Kenya. Our future is integration with the larger region, the whole of South Sudan, an untapped frontier. Eastern Congo, an untapped frontier. Uganda is currently our largest trading partner.
How is SGR going to help
that's the point. Yes. How do you get goods from Uganda to Kenya? How do you get goods from Kenya to Uganda in bulk? We're not talking the road transport.
We only get in there from Mombasa to Nairobi.
The railway, no. It is already. We are already in Naivasha. The railway is in Naivasha as we speak. It is the first. After Naivasha, it's going to.
By road.
No. It's going. The railway is going on up to Busia, and after Busia, the Ugandans have already started constructing their side up to Kampala. The Rwandese have already secured loan from the Chinese to complete their part of it. And the Congolese are considering theirs. And by 2020, 2030 possibly, this railway will hit the Atlantic. For the first time, Kenyans can carry their goods along the railway from Kenya to Cameroon. They can carry their goods along the railway to America because we just embark on the Atlantic. We'll have a direct link to the Atlantic. And as a superpower or a regional superpower, you need to think big. You cannot think about 332 billion that make this country a continental power. And then you start saying that we are wasting money. Kibaki, let me also say this.
Professor, the 332 or 33 billion is only up to Nairobi. And then the Naivasha one has got another cost also. And it might take another 10 years before you get to Malaba or Busia. In the meantime, why don't we use that kind of a money to open up the roads network so that we can open ourselves up to those other countries for business?
Then you are making a plea that's already happening. Go to Mandela for the first time in the history of this republic.
Yes.
We have a tarmac road in Wajir.
Inside the town.
No, don't say anywhere.
Agreed.
We are building.
And
there's a road.
Exactly
There's a road moving from Garissa, I think, to Mandela.
No. It's been there for the last 15 years from the first time Kibaki came in.
The tarmac.
It's always launched before an election, and then it stopped immediately, and it hasn't done more than 20 miles now so far.
It's all right, Mheshimiwa. I have traveled myself. The first time I traveled to Moyale, in 1999,
we have a tarmac road all the way to
we traveled by road, and it took us how many days? Almost 3, 4, 5 days.
It takes you hours now.
Yeah.
It takes you a
now
day.
We traveled just the other day, last year.
Yes.
And it took us 7 hours.
I agree with you.
And we're in Moyale.
But that's why I want us to have more of the Moyale road.
No, you need to diversify. Look at the way it's happening. We are opening the port. Kiridini, the Mombasa port, has been opened up. We've started a new one in Marindi, in Lamu,
yes.
And that road is going that way. That is the port. We now open up the railway, and the Americans have already promised to do a highway, a dual carriage from Mombasa to Nairobi. Thanks God, they will do that for us.
Which is very good.
We hope it is for free. We hope it's for free. It's not a loan. Let's move on also and argue that roads, railways. Apart from railways and roads, look at the airways. Our airport is expanded. Our airports are being expanded elsewhere. What we are doing, or what is happening, is that the country is being opened up. And it's opened up at all sectors. All sectors. The next thing is,
Professor,
are we able economically to invest?
Professor,
yes.
I have always maintained, personally, that the so-called African integration, there are only 2 institutions that have done such a good work. Kenya Airways and Ethiopian Airways, because they travel to every small corner in West Africa, Francophone, Southern Africa. Now they're going to Mogadishu. I agree with you. But I always felt that the roads network probably gave us a much more, in terms of economics of scale, opening up to other places instead of the railway SGR. But let's leave that at that now. We have got the Agenda 4. How do we intend to achieve your housing, food security,
manufacturing,
universal healthcare, and manufacturing? We have killed our manufacturing sector because of cheap imports from China, India, and God knows which other country. How do we intend to protect our industries now from the same people who are giving us loans? I'm talking about the Chinese and others. And Indians, for example, for that matter. And how do we have a strategic paper or a strategy on industrialization before we can even talk about it just as a concept?
First and foremost, let me say the following, that one, President Kenyatta and the team he's working with, and you never know, it might be part of the team, must first prioritize 2 things. One is the national value system, so that we don't have to have the problems of corruption. That needs to be done. And of course, the law that goes with enforcing that value.
Agreed.
In other words, we need a country of integrity. Burkina Faso, the country of gentlemen. We need that, because we cannot prosper as we hope to, without the right culture. Without the right culture. Technology, somebody said, and I'm just paraphrasing, that science gives us the power, but social science gives us the know-how to use that power for the good. Technology left on itself will not do us any good.
Absolutely.
That said, one is essentially saying that we need to prioritize that. Two, we need to prioritize national unity. Last year's election is the most expensive in the history of any election. It cost us 275
billion.
No, 275. Dollars,
$75 million.
2,000, yeah, which translates to about 2,750 kind of per person, and the average is 500 per person globally, meaning it's very expensive. So we need national unity, which means we need to prioritize inclusion. All Kenyans, irrespective of the size of their communities, irrespective of their villages, need to feel that they belong to this republic. I think those are his priorities. And that, on that foundation, then he'll build his 4 pillars. And those 4 pillars that must rest on that foundation, those 4 pillars must also be shielded from globalization. Because globalization is basically the takeover of the weak by the strong. Because every marketplace has its gatekeepers.
Which, of course,
should either be taken over by European Union or America, or you are taken over by the Chinese, the Indians, and the Koreans and the Japanese. That's it, because they are coming in their numbers. Now, what we need to do is to have a strategy paper on each of the pillars.
Of the 4 pillars?
Of the 4 pillars.
We still don't have the strategy.
We don't have a strong strategy pillar. Like, for example, do we have a strategy, a very strong strategy, or spending for the next 100 years?
I agree with you.
The next 100 years, not the next 10 years or 5 years, because we think short term. We are government, you think fiscal, 1 year. Longest you think is 5 years. And then you think 10 years, because that's the tenure of a presidential leader. The point is we need to have a long-term strategy. China has what they are calling the centenary strategy, which is a 200-year strategy. Now, and that is what they are
bicentenary.
Bicentenary, yeah, yes. The bicentenary strategy. So,
which of course makes it much more easier for them to, because we've seen it from the Chinese investments right now. Yeah. They're everywhere, including selling maize on the streets, as people put it. I haven't seen anybody selling that myself. They come with their own drivers. They come with their own labor. Let me just finish. They come with their own labor. You go to the Chinese embassy, and the only time you see a Kenyan is at the gate, where they're taking the visa forms from Kenyan students or Kenyan businessmen going there. If you go into the Chinese embassy, you never see a Kenyan in there. As opposed to, with all the imperfections, all the European and the American embassies in here, you go to the American embassy, and more than half of the employees who are working in there in all the strategic places are Kenyans. And that also goes for all the other embassies too. So the Chinese...
But that's very simple. It's about language. How many Kenyans can write and speak in Chinese?
There's so many. My son does speak. He graduated from a Chinese university.
Okay.
Yes, he speaks and writes Chinese. He graduated from a Chinese university. So what I'm trying to say is that maybe time is going to prove us right. And I'm one person who holds that the Chinese are not up to any good. And given between two sorry scenarios, I still find the Western scenario much easier to deal with because of the language, as you put it, and we're able to negotiate
and
that.
Culture.
And culture and the rest of it, and there's a bit of an integration in there. We keep on fighting them all the time, but it's only in America, in Canada, in Europe, and Norway where you can find a Kenyan or a Somali becoming an MP, a member of parliament. You'll never find a Somali becoming, or a Kikuyu, or a Kenyan for that matter, or a Tanzanian becoming somebody who has those roots in there, becoming a local council member in Shanghai or in Guangzhou or the rest of it. I mean, with all the imperfections, we have a history with the Western world that goes to slavery and goes to actually colonization and the rest of it.
But you understand that
we are much better off, in my opinion, dealing and negotiating hard with them than going to these uncharted territories and areas who and by the way, for your information, when you talk to Kenyan students who have lived there, the Chinese are the worst racists you can ever imagine. No. But anyway, that's beside the point right now. In the absence of a strategy paper, in this open door policy that we have used for the Chinese to come in and engage in any business in the country, You see what I mean?
I do.
In the fact that they are going now into every sector, into the minerals, into the manufacturing, into the trading, into everything. What happened to the so-called Kenyanization, indigenization, Africanization, which every country in the world uses that? You see, economic nationalism is what Trump is talking about. That's the most powerful economy in the world. The Chinese also will not allow you to open up a kiosk in Shanghai or in Canton, in or one of those places. What is happening to our own future in here? Are we not?
I think we are doing well, but we are also grappling with a global problem.
Why is the global problem not working in our advantage? Because we can open up some kiosks in Shanghai and Beijing.
In Guangzhou you open. That's why Kenya Airways is not going to Beijing, the capital of China, because we are interested. We are going straight to Guangzhou. Remember, we don't have a direct.
That's the manufacturing hub.
That's not only the manufacturing hub.
And that's where we take the finished products.
It's where Kenyans are exporting their goods. We're not just taking the manufacturing. People are selling Kenyan products there.
What?
No, people are selling tea. People are selling all the things that Chinese want to buy. You sell what you have. And I think the other thing that's happening, and I think that's what should be worrying you, is the relocation of the industry from China to Africa. We have nobody now is importing tiles from China. Tiles are made here. With the
Chinese technology is being transferred here.
Yeah, and therefore we are getting.
So we have
more technological transfer from China to Africa than from any other. So it's serious. If you go along Kajiado Road, like you're going to Namanga,
these are Kenyans who are putting up those industries.
They're into their partnership with the Chinese.
In a joint venture.
In joint ventures.
Not not like the 60s. You're very young. I know at that time. You're a primary school kid. If I remember in the 70s, you would have a Mwangi shop in Biashara Street, which has the name of Peter Mwangi.
Yes.
But the reality of the matter is that the people who are selling and who own the shop are not indigenous Kenyans. I think somebody gets paid a small amount of money at the end of the year.
That is a legitimate challenge for China.
Yes.
Because as you said, culturally, they have not been used to partnership with that. Remember, before 1978, there is only one country in Africa that was poorer than China. One. The rest of the countries were richer than China.
Yes.
40 years later, after they're opening up, now they are now only one country is closer to that. That's I think it's Botswana. Something like that.
In terms of
the GDP, in Africa.
Because the population is small in Botswana.
Sure.
The bears.
So in other words, you are dealing with a new power that has no infrastructure, whether soft power or otherwise, to deal with Africa.
Professor Kagwanja, somebody of your intellect.
Yes.
Somebody of your experience in political strategy.
Yes.
Working with Kibaki and Uhuru. 1 hour is not a sufficient time for us to exhaust all that needs to be answered and that Kenyans are eagerly waiting from you. Can you give us now your parting shot? Talk to Kenyans on the camera, and you can give us your last comments on that.
I think as Kenyans we need to be proud of one thing. Somebody asked who is Kenyan and what is being Kenyan. I think being Kenyan is being pragmatic, being resilient, being tolerant, and being able to focus on the future rather than the past. And that essentially is what the handshake.
The tolerance itself should be in the run up to, I'm sorry to bat you on, you tolerate and you're patient as you're waiting for your cow to deliver the calf so that you can have the milk.
That's the point.
Not tolerant that you can carry the mzigo on the back kuvumilia, as we put it in Kenya.
No, that is not the point. If you look at the many hoops we've gone through as a country, and you look at our neighbors, Ethiopia, Somalia, Congo, Uganda, Tanzania,
which is a distant second to us when it comes to economy.
Then you go to South Sudan. One thing you find in those countries, those elements I've talked about are not there. Our leadership, our elite understand the limit of doing politics at the expense of the state. And when we are finished with our politics, we settle down to more serious issues of building the future for our children and the coming generations. I hope and I wish that we maintain this. I know people are talking about the handshake is good, the handshake is not good. The point is Kenya needed a cooling moment. Kenya will always need a cooling moment in the future. And that ethic, the Kenyan ethic of tolerance, the Kenyan ethic of pragmatism is what has kept us going.
You think the fight on corruption will be won?
The fight on corruption, you can never remove disease on the face of the earth because we always fight back. But we need...
How do we believe that? How do you trust that Uhuru is genuine about this fight on corruption?
The political commitment of Uhuru is not in doubt. The question is whether the systems in place
he has to slay close friends.
No, not only that.
Big guys in his government.
You don't have to target any individual. We are all Kenyan citizens with ID cards and ID numbers. The point is this. Corruption must be made so expensive that Kenyans choose not to be corrupt. If it is cheap, then you have corrupted people. The other thing is, Kenyans must know that there are only two P's that dominate the world and or have dominated civilizations for eternity. One is pain, the other one is pleasure. You do good, you have pleasure. You do bad, you have pain. In Kenya,
you go to committee.
In Kenya, it is the only place where you do bad and then you have pleasure. Yes. You are corrupt and you live luxuriously.
And you work for the country.
You work for the country. You break your back.
And you have pain.
You have pain. I think we need to get back to the drawing board and construct a social contract that punish bad deeds and which reward good deeds.
Finally,
that's all.
Shall we have a referendum, in your opinion? And shall we change the system of government we have now to one which is
I don't think the emphasis should be on parliamentary this or that.
Shall we have a referendum?
Those are ideological issues. Mm-hmm. The question that Kenyans are dealing with is how do we ensure that we don't have cycles of violence every 5 years? Because that tampers with our development plans. It undermines the gains we make in development. And what there is in it is for us Kenyans to understand our society. If you preach majoritarian democracy in Rwanda, you preach majoritarian democracy in Burundi, you will always have a Hutu president. Yeah. You will always have a Tutsi president. Now, if here you don't craft the constitution in a manner that it is inclusive or perceived to be inclusive, then you can talk about parliamentary, you can talk about presidential or semi-presidential, but you're not going anywhere.
The country will always be divided.
Yes, the unfinished business after the 2010 constitution, and which was proved by the 2017 election or double election, is that we need to work very hard to make Kenyans feel included. It is all about the tyranny of numbers, because if you get the Kikuyu, and they vote let's talk about Mount Kenya people. They vote to a man or to a woman in total. With any other community, community
they win.
Out of the 5, that will win. So we're talking about the tyranny of numbers. What happened to the other groups that may not feel included? So it is the tyranny of numbers versus electoral justice. And that was the drama that unfolded in 2017. A referendum is a must.
Thank you very much, Professor Kagwanja. It's been a pleasure having you on this show, and I'm sure I'll have you another time in the future when we can talk about much more than we have now been able to cover in 1 hour.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Viewers, we have come to the end of the show. Thank you.